what's going on, everybody? Gerald here with your weather forecast. Hope you're having a wonderful and safe Wednesday so far. It has been crazy out there in the sections of the southern plains, from Texas up through Oklahoma, Arkansas, the Little Rock area, Memphis, seeing a ton of ice. And I've seen some videos out of the Austin area that looks like over half an inch of ice in some places. So this system seems to overperforming at least a little bit in certain places, and it's still ongoing right now, and I expect that ice to continue to accumulate going into tonight and into tomorrow morning before finally beginning to let up going into kind of the second half of this week. But that's whenever we run into this deadly cold that is likely up into sections of New England. We're talking wind chills below -80 in sections of Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire. So that is going to be some crazy stuff we see there, and I'm going to break all of that down for you in today's video. But before we get to that, I want to say thank you. This time yesterday we were sitting at about 845 subscribers. Now we're at 963. So an insane gain over the past 24 hours, and we are getting crazy close to 1,000. So if you haven't already subscribed and you're new here, I'd love for you to do that. I kind of introduced myself a little bit in yesterday's video. If you want to watch kind of the beginning part of that, I talk a little bit about myself there. But with all that said, let's go ahead and get into this. Also, I forgot to mention, but something else we're going to talk about today is the potential for maybe a little bit of snow in sections of the Carolinas, although I really don't expect much, and if anything, it'll likely just be flurries that we're looking at with that. But the more important thing right now, obviously, is this ongoing ice storm here into sections of the southern plains. You can see we still have those warnings up from Austin up to Dallas and areas back to the west, seeing this ice still accumulate. And even these advisories stretch all the way over towards the Nashville area. So this is a big section of the country that is dealing with this right now, with kind of just what it's felt like this has been going on forever now, but it kind of has really with the past couple of days, seeing this ice accumulate. Looking at radar here, you can see this is kind of the climax of the system here, the peak of it, if you will, with this big blob of precipitation ongoing here from Dallas-Fort Worth back towards the Lubbock area, Midland, Texas, and up towards Amarillo, even seeing a little bit of that frozen precipitation. And then as well as the Oklahoma City area and areas south, also seeing some of that frozen precipitation. All rain right now for most of us down here into areas around Baton Rouge through just about all of Louisiana, seeing mainly rain. Most of Mississippi as well, except for maybe extreme northeastern Mississippi, seeing that. So looking at some of these reports right now, we do have those freezing rain reports still coming in here around the Dallas area. And even down towards Austin, still seeing some of that freezing rain ongoing. Luckily, some of this warm Gulf air should begin to kind of work its way through the surface here within the next 12 hours or so, and much of this frozen precipitation should erode as this warmer air begins to push into sections of the southern plains. But as that is ongoing, we're then going to get a cold outbreak into areas of the east, and we're definitely going to talk about that. But timing out the rest of this storm system for you here across Texas and Oklahoma, still going to be dealing with this kind of freezing drizzle and ongoing freezing rain through the overnight tonight, likely getting another batch of that going into around the midnight hour, and then even into tomorrow morning, still dealing with this freezing rain before eventually, as we get into tomorrow afternoon, I think most of this begins to work its way back off to the west, and we finally begin to clear out. And I think we get above freezing tomorrow for most of us here. So we should hopefully see some of that ice that has accumulated begin to melt going into tomorrow, and definitely by the time we hit this weekend, most of that ice being able to melt off of those tree limbs, power lines, and etc. But nonetheless, we likely still will have some rain left over on the backside tomorrow afternoon, although like I said, I think we'll be mainly above freezing for most of us here. So that rain, once we start getting into tomorrow afternoon, whenever we get above freezing, should just be rain and not freezing rain, and then we really clear out by the time that we get into Thursday afternoon. So how much ice is left to come here? I still think in certain areas here, especially to the west of Dallas-Fort Worth, could get another 1/4 of an inch of ice on top of what you've already seen. I think some of these totals might be a little bit overdone, but 1/4 of an inch of ice is definitely possible. But most areas likely seeing 1/10 of an inch or so left to come here through sections of Texas. So moving this on over into kind of Thursday, I do want to talk about these temperatures and that rebound. We will see highs tomorrow, likely, like I said, getting above freezing for most of us. Some pockets maybe getting stuck below freezing, but by the time we get into Friday, definitely above freezing through just about all the southern plains here. And we should have much better travel conditions with that ice that is left over beginning to melt, even getting into the 50s into a lot of Texas, especially out towards the Panhandle into the Lubbock and Amarillo area. Still holding on to the 40s in Dallas, but this will be with likely sunshine, so that will definitely help to reduce whatever ice is left over. So moving this on over to the Tennessee and Ohio river valleys, we still got a ways to go here into this section of the country as well. Still seeing some of that freezing drizzle this afternoon here through sections of Arkansas, the Memphis area, and even up towards Nashville, maybe seeing a little bit of that freezing drizzle. As we go into tonight, that continues with kind of these scattered freezing rain showers of sorts, if you will. And that continues into midnight, and then by the time we get into tomorrow morning, still dealing with kind of a slim band of that freezing rain here into those areas that are below freezing. But luckily for us, most of this precipitation shield is further to the south, so it will be much more of a smaller area impacted by this freezing rain going into tomorrow morning, just because that precipitation isn't overlapping as far north into that cold air. And then that will continue before once again getting into tomorrow afternoon. I think just about everyone that is seeing that rain will likely be above freezing before this shield of precipitation begins to move off into the Carolinas. So how much ice do we have left to talk about in these areas? I'll move this ahead just to make sure we are far enough ahead into time here. Really not much into areas of Nashville. Definitely more back here into the Little Rock and Memphis area. Still think 1/10 of an inch up to maybe 2/10 of an inch of ice is likely here through central and southern Arkansas and back towards Memphis. But over towards the Nashville area, it looks like more of a glaze left for you guys. And then everything to the south of there here into Alabama, Georgia, and the Carolinas looks like mainly rain. Except for maybe the mountains. Could get a little bit of snow, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But looking at those high temperatures tomorrow, again, those areas that see ice, I think we rebound, though, above freezing. So most of that ice should begin to kind of melt away going into tomorrow. And if not tomorrow, we'll try to on Friday. It'll be a close call because we'll have this kind of cold Arctic air that moves into the northeast trying to sneak its way here into section of the Tennessee and Ohio river valleys, but I think overall still mainly above freezing here in those areas that do see that ice accumulate. And then by the time we get into Saturday and Sunday, definitely not having any of those leftover problems. As for the mid-Atlantic, we actually saw some snow this morning. New York City finally was able to get their first measurable snow of the year. I think it was a little under half an inch maybe. So this is the latest it's ever been in a year to see snow accumulate in New York City for the first time. So, we're breaking records. That's kind of how bad this winter has been in terms of snowfall here in the east. And unfortunately for you snow lovers, I don't see much relief really within the next 7 days or so. But moving back onto the system that we're currently dealing with here, as we get into tomorrow morning into the Carolinas, I think precipitation begins to pick up into the Charlotte metro area, back towards Raleigh here into North Carolina, and likely rain for Asheville as well. Those higher peaks into the mountains here could see some snow mixing in here up towards Grandfather Mountain, Mount Mitchell. I think could see some snow out of this system. And then if any of this rain does work its way far enough north tomorrow into some of that cold air left over into places Virginia, could see some light snow there, although I don't expect major problems out of that. And then kind of through the day tomorrow, just getting these rounds of rain and rounds of showers before getting into tomorrow afternoon. It becomes a lot more steady for areas like Charlotte, Columbia, Greenville, Spartanburg, seeing a lot more of that kind of steady rainfall before getting into Thursday night and into Friday. It looks like this precipitation tries to move out, and we have a pretty nice Friday afternoon through much of the Mid-Atlantic. Now, we do have a bit of a wild card here for areas of the Mid-Atlantic. Some of our models have been hinting at maybe some of this cold air trapped up here and kind of this cold air damming wedge that we've been dealing with tries to catch up to some of this moisture here into North and South Carolina and produce maybe some backside snow or flurries. And I'll show you some of those models. The main culprit of this has been the GFS showing this really for about 24 hours now or so. And you can see the GFS keeps this precipitation around long enough into Friday that this cold air or this wedge of cold air up here kind of pushes in and overlaps that precipitation and helps to produce some snow, although not a lot. And if anything does fall here, it would likely really just be flurries or as we like to say, white rain, if you will, where it looks It looks like it's snowing, it is snowing, but it's really just like rain. It's melting the second it hits everything. So the GFS has been showing that, and these are the GFS ensemble members. You can see they show this idea of maybe some snow falling here, especially into eastern and southeastern North Carolina, and into sections of northeastern South Carolina. But I really wouldn't put too much stock into this. Again, if anything does fall, it would likely just be some flurries here in eastern North Carolina, maybe a quick period of light snow, but temperatures would be so marginal, it wouldn't really cause any issues whatsoever. And just to show you how small of a chance this is, this is our blend of models, or all of our models put together, and you got a big old goose egg here, absolutely nothing. So don't get your hopes up, but also don't be surprised if maybe a couple flurries mix in here at the end of that precipitation shield going into Friday through the southeast. So now talking about that dangerous cold in the northeast, this is going into Friday. You can see this very cold Canadian air working its way up here into the northeast, and this is going to cause honestly dangerous cold in some places, especially those higher elevations up here into sections of Vermont and New Hampshire as well as Maine. And you can see as we get into Friday afternoon, this really intensifies this cold shot. And then going into Friday evening as well, we've got temperatures here more than 40 degrees below what they should be this time of the year. And this is for early February. So, if your normal low or in early February is in the teens, subtract 40 from that, and that's what you could be looking at here this weekend. But luckily, this does look to be short-lived, and we already are back above average by the time we hit Sunday. So really only a 24-hour period of this. And it's kind of crazy to see that. But to kind of give you a bit more of specifics on this, more of an up-close view again here, just looking at how far below the average those temperatures will be, very well below average here, especially kind of Boston northbound here into New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine, and upstate New York, although definitely still below average here throughout the East Coast and the Mid-Atlantic as a whole. But looking at those temperatures more in depth here, and let me back this up so I can show it to you, going into Thursday afternoon, kind of an average early February day here. Temperatures in the 30s and 20s for most of us in New England, as well as 40s down into the Mid-Atlantic. But once we get into Thursday night and Friday morning, this is when this shot of cold air works its way in. And Friday morning is one of those mornings it's going to be cold, but as we go throughout the day Friday, it likely doesn't really rebound. If anything, it gets colder. So by the time you're in Friday afternoon, you're likely in the single digits in Boston, low teens in New York City, 20s, teens into Philly, and then up here closer to the Canadian border, you're well below zero in the middle of the afternoon on Friday, and then those temperatures really plummet as we get into Friday night here. Sub-zero temperatures all the way down into Hartford, Connecticut, Providence, Rhode Island, New York City. It's going to be close, I think single digits for you, and then teens down into Philly, but up here into sections of New Hampshire, Vermont, sub 30, looking likely here in some places. And then whenever you factor in those wind chills, it can get even more dangerous. Again, this is Friday afternoon's wind chills, sub-zero for most of us. And then once we get into Saturday morning, those wind chills getting close to 50, 60 below here into sections of New Hampshire and Maine, and then single digits all the way down to Philly with just really widespread below zero wind chills. Again, luckily, though, as we get into Sunday afternoon, we're already kind of back to normal here in the 30s and 40s. And once we get into Monday afternoon, we are really kind of beginning to warm up here into the Northeast. So this will be very short-lived, but it will hit you with a punch. I can guarantee you that. So looking long-term here, going into next week, the pattern looks to really go back to what we saw all of January, well above average temperatures here throughout the East Coast, and then back to those below average temperatures out west. And I think we get kind of a continued storm track, active storm pattern as well, with that above average rainfall here throughout the east. And I wouldn't be surprised if maybe we have another severe weather threat going into the middle of next week here into sections of kind of the southeast and the southern plains. So we'll watch for that. We'll talk about that later on this weekend once we get a bit closer and we're finally done with this ice storm that we're dealing with. But we've had a crazy week ahead, or really this past week has been crazy, I should say, and it looks to quiet down a little bit going into next week in terms of the winter weather, but it'll honestly feel a lot like spring, I think, for a lot of us next week, and that could help to fuel some severe storms. So with all that said, if you enjoyed the video, I'd love for you to hit that like button. And once again, if you're new and you haven't already subscribed, please do so, because we are getting crazy close to a thousand subscribers, and we've got really big plans ahead, and I'd love for you to stick around and see some of those. But with all that said, make sure you have a very safe rest of your night. Try to stay warm out there, and I will see you all tomorrow.